Let's talk about how we define it. And maybe we can pause and have a discussion after I share this. Now, I interviewed over 20 agentic founders. I didn't just make this up, and I didn't just ask an LLM. I actually talked to the founders. So, what the heck is an AI agent? It's autonomous software that can perceive the environment, that can actually look around or read content or have visual capability. It can make decisions. This is why it's different than RPA. It can take actions to complete those goals, and then it can learn over time. And so it can access memory, determine that plan of action. And that plan of action is typically coming from a large language model or multiple. We'll see verification and permissions. It'll complete actions, and then it learns. Now, the advanced cases are we'll hire or recruit or even build or launch other AI agents into a swarm or orchestrate that. So a couple examples for home, maybe you want to have an AI agent plan your meals, make sure you have the right food in the fridge and the pantry, or to book those restaurants. For your email, I don't know about you, but I haven't been at inbox zero more than one time in the last 2 years. Could it actually triage and respond to basic emails? And then three, at work, maybe it can collect all the data and reports, maybe like for your show. And so you can get all that information tallied for your sponsors and whatnot. And then physically, you are in San Francisco, you see the Waymos around. Those are actually AI agents per the definition. And those are level 4 autonomous. So they actually are autonomous in those ways. So love to hear your thoughts on like how I see the big view. And then I'll talk about the forecast and what I think is going to happen.
Yeah, Jeremiah, this is really good. And, people talk about agents a lot, so it's great to have a definition. And for me, the sort of the key words here are achieve specific goals. Because I think sometimes, you hear sort of people on LinkedIn saying, well, agents is just a fancy name on top of software, right? But if you think about how software is typically created, or has been in the past, it has been the how, not the what, right? You give it instructions, do this, then do that, follow this instruction. If this, then do this, if that, then do that, and so on, right? And of course, they can go out into the world and do those things and maybe even perceive their environment in some sense. But to me, the big difference is when you prompt an agent, you're not telling it what to do. You're telling it what to achieve, right? You're saying, this is the goal, figure out how to do it yourself. And that, I think, is the new part.
So to add on to that, you raise a great point, Yanov. So the agents are non-deterministic. Let me say it a different way. It'll complete the task differently each time. In many cases, it'll do it differently in each time. And so it's actually kind of hard to forecast what it's going to do. So that's kind of important. That's different than like the traditional way people have been using AI when it's if this, then or that, where it's pre-scripted. These are not pre-scripted in most cases.
There's a lot of people these days calling basic generative AI that you give a one-shot prompt and it gives you a response. They're calling them agents. And I think that is a terrible and distracting conflation of terms. And I think this definition that you've presented here, Jeremiah, is very, very useful. And I think also the example of Waymo is very, very useful. People forget that Waymos are essentially robots and they're agents. And I think that's a really useful thing to hold in your mind. And the thing that matters the most to me about it is that it's, as you said, you give it a destination, a goal, and it figures out a multi-step adaptive process to achieve that. And it does it in a long-lived, asynchronous background way, meaning it's not you give it a prompt and it responds with one piece of information. You give it a goal or a destination, and it takes multiple steps over a long-lived process, a process that is adaptive to changing circumstances, and then it comes back to you many minutes, hours, or days later once it's succeeded or it needs some input. So yeah, I think it's really important to separate these terms of a one-shot assistant or LLM and a long-lived agent.
But Jeremiah, I do think there's a gray area, and I do think this definition thing is important. We can move on in a moment, but if you think about something like ChatGPT deep research, right? Is that an agent or isn't it, right? You say, hey, give me information on this task. It goes on, makes a bunch of decisions. It's a reasoning model. It searches the web. It gathers information. It generates a report. You could say, in a sense, it's an agent. But I feel that it doesn't necessarily capture that full sense of agency. It's in the gray area. And what I'd put forward for your consideration is when we talk about an agent in this sort of context is really, it's not read-only. It's actually taking action in the world and changing the state of the world, right? Like deep research doesn't do that. In the end, everything it's doing is read-only. All the actions it's taking is gathering information. It's not changing anything.
That's exactly right. So we invested in Please.AI, which is an AI agent that will help you with planning. Oh, Chris, you know the founders. They used to be called Multion. They did a pivot.
Mhm.
And the new app, and you can see on their website, will help you with planning and also to get trips together or plan your meals, like I talked about in bullet one, but also execute, do those things, or reserve that restaurant, or go book that gym class, right? So the execution part is going to be critical. And that's how it is different than a traditional large language model, which is basically a chat or a discussion or content being generated. You're right.
Yeah. I would say if you want to put these on things on a spectrum, deep research is probably amongst the lightest weight version of a common agent. You give it a basic prompt and it does an awful lot of reasoning about how it's going to go fulfill that research task, but it doesn't affect the world. And then I think Waymo is probably one of the richest and most sophisticated agents that, especially if you're in San Francisco, you might interact with on a day-to-day basis in today's world. And it is affecting the real world. And so those are sort of maybe the two ends of the spectrum at the moment, with, you know, sales agents and email processing agents and booking agents and so on living somewhere along that line at this point.